Before we dive into today's story, I want to mention that this is part 2 of a previous story. The link to part 1 is in the description. While this story can be enjoyed on its own, I highly recommend checking out part 1 first for full context. The Tri-Alliance medical station had never been quiet, but tonight there was a different kind of energy in the air. Not the usual background hum of life-saving machines, nor the weary chatter of overworked doctors. This was something heavier. Dr. Marcus Rhyne stood in the medical bay, rolling his aching shoulders as the last emergency patient of the night was stabilized. The surgical gloves he peeled off were stained with alien blood, some of it human red, some of it Cevarin silver, and some in shades that didn't exist in any earthly medical textbook. He should have felt relief. Instead, he just felt cornered. It had been only a day since he had done the impossible, saved the high envoy of the Cevarin people, Trellix, from a fatal injury his own people had deemed untreatable. The Cevarin medics had been prepared to declare his death a tragic inevitability, but Marcus had refused to accept that answer. He had cut, he had sealed, he had guessed, and Trellix had lived. The problem was that his own people didn't see that as a victory. The Dominion, the Cevarin's ruling authority, had immediately declared Trellix an anomaly. By their laws, a leader who could not recover naturally was no longer Cevarin. He had lost his right to rule. His existence had become a political threat. So Marcus had done the only logical thing. He had smuggled the most wanted man in the sector onto a rusted human freighter and sent him into deep space with a half-functional medical kit and a pilot who barely had a moral compass. And now the Dominion was parked outside the station demanding his surrender. The lead Cevarin medic, a translucent-limbed figure who had once argued against Marcus's methods, watched him carefully. Their luminous eyes flickered a Cevarin trait Marcus had come to associate with discomfort. "You have altered history." Marcus exhaled. "Yeah, that happens sometimes. You understand they will not let this stand." "Oh, I fully understand." The medic hesitated. The Cevarins weren't used to conflict, let alone rebellion. But Marcus could see something new in them. The Cevarin medical team had watched as he saved Trellix. They had helped him. And now, despite their fear, they were listening. And maybe, just maybe, learning. Marcus crossed his arms. "We need to talk about your approach to medicine." The lead medic tilted their head. "Our approach." "Yes," Marcus said. "The part where you give up." One of the younger Cevarin bristled. "We do not simply let patients die." "You sure about that?" Marcus shot back. "Trellix was still breathing, still alive, and you were ready to write him off. Because the book said so." He gestured toward the medical tables behind him. "I get it. Your traditions say what's possible and what isn't. But medicine isn't about tradition. It's about trying." Silence. Endir. Then, after a long pause, the lead medic spoke. "Teach us." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me." The Cevarin's voice was steady. "You have knowledge beyond our own. Methods we do not practice. If what you say is true, that our limitations are self-imposed, then teach us what is not impossible." For the first time in hours, Marcus felt something other than exhaustion. He felt hope. The training started immediately. Marcus quickly realized that the Cevarin weren't incompetent, far from it. Their knowledge of their own biology was precise, their surgical techniques elegant and efficient. The problem wasn't skill, it was mentality. They treated medicine like mathematics. If an equation didn't have a known solution, they simply did not attempt to solve it. Marcus changed that. He started with emergency trauma procedures, things they had never done before. "Okay," he said, standing over a practice model, "your standard procedure for hemorrhaging is to isolate and neutralize the damaged vessel. That works great if you've got hours, but what if you don't?" A younger Cevarin hesitated. "Then the patient is beyond saving." Marcus scoffed. "Not anymore. Watch this." He activated a human-designed vascular regenerator, demonstrating how to rapidly seal major breaches with biosynthetic patches before full reconstructive surgery. "This isn't a permanent fix," he explained, "but it buys you time. Time is the most valuable thing in medicine." The Cevarins took notes, but their expressions were uncertain. Our people do not heal in the same way. So we adapt. He pulled up a holographic display of Cevarin anatomy. Your bodies use oscillating biocurrents to regulate internal stability. If we apply controlled electrostatic stabilization alongside the clotting process, we can override the rejection response. The lead medic's glow flickered with interest. You propose combining stabilizers with direct intervention. Marcus nodded. Exactly. You don't just watch the body fail, you force it to hold. The younger medic hesitated. That is, interference. Marcus narrowed his eyes. It's medicine. The lead medic studied the display, considering. Then, slowly they nodded. And the Cevarin started trying. Hours passed in a blur of lessons and hands-on practice. Marcus guided them through everything from neural intervention to rapid response organ repair. He showed them how to perform iterative treatment, trying different approaches in real time, instead of relying solely on pre-approved methods. The moment of real breakthrough came when a severely injured Cevarin was rushed in a deep abdominal wound, eerily similar to the one Trellix had suffered. The younger medics hesitated, but the lead medic immediately took charge. Life currents destabilizing, one of them called. Then stabilize them, the lead medic said sharply. Activate a controlled oscillation field and prepare vascular regeneration patches. The younger medic fumbled with the equipment. But if we interfere too much, the body adapts, the lead medic snapped. You have seen this. Marcus grinned. The team worked with newfound confidence. Where once they would have hesitated, they acted. The oscillation stabilizers pulsed to life, slowing the internal cascade. The synthetic patches fused, sealing the breach. The patient's vitals stabilized. One of the younger medics stared at the monitor, stunned. They would have died. But they didn't, Marcus said. The lead medic turned to him, their eyes unreadable. Because we tried. Marcus smirked. Welcome to modern medicine. By the time Marcus finally stepped out of the medbay, exhaustion weighed heavy in his limbs. But there was no time to rest. Karen was waiting for him. The station administrator had dark circles under her eyes, and her usual sharp expression was tighter than usual. You've got about 5 minutes before the Dominion sends a real ultimatum. Marcus exhaled. They're demanding me. Karen nodded. And if we refuse, they might make an example of us. Marcus glanced at the holo displays. The Dominion warships still hovered outside the station, unmoving. Waiting. He rubbed his temples. We need to stall. Karen crossed her arms. You have a plan. Marcus smirked. You're going to love this one. Minutes later, the Dominion's comm channel opened. Commander Cylon's cold, silver-ringed eyes filled the screen. Administrator Karen, you have delayed long enough. Dr. Rhyne will surrender himself, or we will take action. Karen didn't flinch. Commander Cylon, I believe we need to talk. Cylon's gaze flickered toward Marcus. I do not negotiate with criminals. Marcus stepped forward, arms crossed. Good thing I'm not one. Cylon's voice was cold. You have corrupted our people's understanding of life and death. No, Marcus said. I've expanded it. A pause. Then Cylon said, explain. Marcus smirked. Gladly. Because for the first time, the Dominion wasn't giving orders. They were listening. The silence after Cylon's single word explain was heavier than anything Marcus had experienced in an operating room. Karen shifted beside him, clearly ready to pull the plug on this conversation if it went south. The station's officers hovered tensely near their stations, monitoring for any sign that the Dominion warship outside was about to do something unpleasant, like lock weapons on them. Marcus, however, only had eyes for the Cevarin commander on the screen. Cylon wasn't a fool, he wouldn't be here if he was, but his expression was unreadable, a mask of cold control. Good. That meant he wasn't shutting this down outright. Marcus exhaled and folded his arms. All right, Commander. You think what I did to Trellix was unnatural? Fine, prove it. Cylon's silver-ringed eyes flickered. His survival is the proof. No, it isn't. Marcus turned toward the holo display and activated the research data he and the Cevarin medics had compiled. Anatomical models filled the screen, alongside comparative studies between failed and successful interventions. You want proof? Here. This is Cevarin biology. I didn't change Trellix. I treated him using methods that were never attempted because your people wrote off the possibility before testing it. The data flickered across the room: graphs, medical readouts, tissue regrowth scans. Everything the Dominion had deemed impossible. Silent didn't flinch. These procedures were unauthorized. Marcus scoffed. So that's your argument? That I didn't get permission before saving his life? Silent's fingers twitched slightly. You interfere in matters beyond your understanding. Marcus stepped closer to the console, his voice sharpening. You're right. I didn't understand. Not at first. I had no manual, no research, no historical precedent. But instead of standing back and letting him die, I did what any real doctor does: I adapted. He gestured to the Cevarin medics standing at the edge of the command room. And now they understand too. They're using these techniques to save lives, Cevarin lives. Are you saying that's unnatural? Silent was silent. Karen, arms crossed, finally interjected. You know, Commander, you came here prepared to throw accusations. But your people are watching this broadcast. She tilted her head. What do you think they're going to say when they see you dismissing scientific proof? Silent's jaw tensed. Marcus could feel the shift happening. This wasn't about whether the Dominion believed in the research. This was about control. The second they acknowledged that Marcus was right, they lost their grip on the narrative. But now, that grip was slipping anyway. Silent studied the data again. The tension in his stance hadn't lessened, but something else flickered in his expression, something Marcus hadn't seen before. Doubt. Finally, the commander exhaled. The Dominion Council will not accept this without a formal challenge. Trellix's voice suddenly cut in from the holocom. Then let them issue one. The entire room turned toward the display as a second transmission patched through. The connection was grainy. Marcus could see the worn metal walls of the Longshot's cockpit in the background, along with Darek slouching in the pilot's chair, looking deeply amused. Trellix, however, was all business. He met Silent's gaze with quiet authority. I am still high envoy. I am still Cevarin. I invoke the right of verification. A murmur swept through the Cevarin medics behind Marcus. Silent went rigid. That right has not been invoked in centuries. Trellix tilted his head slightly. Perhaps that is because, until now, no one has survived to invoke it. Marcus glanced at Karen. I'm guessing this is important. Karen sighed. It's an old political mechanism. A leader who is accused of being unfit can demand an official challenge publicly, with evidence. If the challenge is accepted and they win, they retain their position. Marcus smirked. Sounds perfect. Silent, however, looked anything but pleased. This will disrupt the order of our governance. Trellix's voice was firm. No, it will force our people to face the truth. A heavy silence followed. Then, finally, Silent said, the council will deliberate. The holoscreen went dark. Marcus let out a slow breath. Karen turned to him. You just forced an interstellar government into a medical malpractice lawsuit. Marcus grinned. Yeah, feels pretty good. Over the next 24 hours, everything changed. The Dominion's silence didn't last long. The council officially accepted Trellix's challenge, setting the stage for a full public hearing, something that hadn't happened in centuries. It would be held in neutral space, live broadcasted across all Cevarin networks. Marcus spent that time working with Trellix and the Cevarin medics, refining their presentation. They built their case not on emotion, but on undeniable fact. Case studies of patients who had been saved using these new techniques. Data proving that Cevarin biology was always capable of recovery beyond what the Dominion had taught. Comparative scans of Trellix's current state against pre-injury models, showing that his body was still fully, unquestionably Cevarin. There would be no loopholes. No way for the Dominion to claim this was a fabrication. By the time the hearing was ready to begin, Marcus was exhausted but ready. The hearing chamber aboard the neutral diplomatic station was grand, circular, and filled with figures of power. On one side sat the Dominion's ruling members, flanked by loyal officials. On the other, Trellix stood with representatives of the Valrhyn Accord and independent Cevarin factions who had begun questioning the old ways. Marcus sat near Trellix, medical data queued up on his terminal, ready for whatever came next. The room was deadly silent as the first formal statements were made. Then, the questioning began. A Dominion official stood, her gaze sharp. High Envoy Trellix, do you deny that your survival was due to human interference? Trellix was calm. I acknowledge that my treatment was discovered by a human, but the biological process was my own. Marcus tapped his console, bringing up a holo display. Right here, cellular regrowth, primal conduit restabilization, all Cevarin processes. No genetic alteration, no outside enhancement, just medical intervention at the right time. Another official spoke. But this method has never been accepted in Cevarin medical doctrine. But Marcus leaned forward. Because no one was allowed to test it, he gestured toward the research logs. The Dominion declared these injuries untreatable without actually trying to treat them. That's not medicine, that's willful ignorance. The murmurs in the audience grew. Cevarin, who had been silent, finally spoke. You claim this knowledge was suppressed. Why? Trellix met his gaze. Because it makes our mortality a choice. A long pause. Then, finally, Cevarin said, show me. Marcus immediately activated the final sequence, a comparison of pre-existing Cevarin medical texts against what had now been proven. The room was silent as the data played. It was undeniable. And then, the first real crack appeared. One of the Dominion officials, an elder figure who had held power for decades, rose slowly. If we accept this, we must accept that we have been wrong. Trellix's voice was quiet, but powerful. Then accept it. The tension in the chamber was suffocating. Then, to Marcus's utter shock, Cevarin turned to his own delegation. And he nodded. The truth must be acknowledged, Cevarin said, even if it changes everything. And with those words, the Dominion's control broke. For the first time in centuries, the Cevarin people had a choice. And they chose progress. For the first time in Cevarin history, change had won. The hearing chamber was still thick with tension, but the momentum had shifted. Cevarin's words, the truth must be acknowledged, hung in the air like an unspoken decree. The Dominion Council had spent centuries dictating what was and wasn't possible, weaving their authority into the very fabric of Cevarin survival. Now, they were faced with the choice: uphold a lie or adapt to the truth. The murmurs in the audience grew louder. Some voices were uncertain, others frustrated, but more and more, there was something else. Curiosity. Marcus, standing beside Trellix, could feel the shift. It was like watching a patient teeter between life and death, waiting for the moment their body decided which way to go. And right now, the Cevarin were deciding. Finally, an elder Dominion official, one of the most rigid members of the council, exhaled sharply. This is too much. Trellix turned his head. Explain. The elder's silver eyes were hard. You claim this knowledge was suppressed, but do you not see the consequences of what you ask? If we accept this, if we change the way we treat survival itself, what happens to our traditions? To the way we govern? If death is no longer inevitable, neither is the order we have built. Cevarin, still standing with the Dominion officials, tilted his head slightly. You mean the order you have built? A silence fell over the room. Marcus's eyes narrowed. That was not the voice of blind loyalty. The elder official looked at Cevarin with something almost like betrayal. You would stand against us. I stand where the truth stands, Cevarin said, his voice measured. Trellix's survival was not unnatural, nor was it a violation of what it means to be Cevarin. It was a failure of our understanding. Marcus saw it now, Cevarin's hesitation before, his skepticism, his unwillingness to simply dismiss the facts. He wasn't just an enforcer of the old ways. He was a believer in order. And now, that belief had been shaken. Trellix stepped forward. The Dominion was built on the idea that Cevarin life is fragile, that only the strongest and most unyielding deserve to govern. He spread his hands, his silver eyes scanning the room. But we are not fragile. We are not static. We adapt. It is time our governance reflected that. The elder scoffed. And you believe you should lead this change? Trellix met his gaze without flinching. Yes. Another murmur swept through the chamber. One of the younger officials hesitated. If the council does not accept this, the people will. The hearing is being broadcast. They are already questioning. We cannot ignore this. Marcus smirked. The cracks in the Dominion's authority were widening. The elder official's mandibles tightened in frustration. This is a dangerous precedent. Silen's voice was calm. No, it is progress. For the first time, the elder official faltered. And that was when Marcus knew. They had won. The aftermath of the hearing was chaos. The Dominion did not collapse, but it fractured. Some high-ranking officials immediately stepped down, unwilling to be part of a government that had lost its claim to absolute authority. Others resisted the change, but the public tide had already shifted. The broadcast had reached every corner of Cevarin space, and when the people saw a leader who had survived, when they saw proof that they had been denied medical advancements for centuries, they began to question everything. Trellix, fully reinstated as High Envoy, wasted no time. The first decree under his renewed leadership was simple. Cevarin medicine would no longer be bound by tradition, and the first step was training. Marcus was given full authority to oversee a complete overhaul of Cevarin emergency medicine. Every major medical facility would receive human-influence techniques, and Cevarin doctors would be trained in the methods Marcus had used to save Trellix. It was a logistical nightmare, but Marcus didn't care. Because now, when a badly wounded Cevarin was brought into a medical bay, the doctors tried. They didn't step back. They didn't whisper about inevitability. They fought. And for Marcus, that was the real victory. 1 month later, Marcus stood in a newly established medical training center on the Cevarin homeworld. The facility was bright, sterile, filled with both human and Cevarin equipment. It had been built in record time, funded directly by Trellix's government. The lead Cevarin medic from the station stood beside him, observing as trainees worked on a simulation. "This is odd," the medic said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What is?" "To see our people hesitate not out of fear, but because they wish to be better." Marcus smirked. "Yeah, well, welcome to my world." The medic watched the trainees for a long moment before turning back to Marcus. "We would not have reached this moment without you." Marcus exhaled. "You would have." Eventually. The medic shook their head. "Not in time." Marcus rolled his shoulders. He wasn't good at this whole sentimental gratitude thing, so he deflected. "You know, if you ever get bored of this place, you could always come work at the Tri-Alliance medical station." The medic tilted their head. "To learn more of human medicine. To learn improvisation." The medic considered that. Then, in a rare moment of Cevarin humor, they said, "You mean recklessness?" Marcus grinned. "Same thing." That night, Marcus found himself sitting on the balcony of Trellix's personal residence. The High Envoy had invited him for a private conversation, away from political advisors and medical staff. Trellix poured 2 glasses of an unfamiliar Cevarin drink and handed one to Marcus. "You don't strike me as the social drinking type," Marcus noted, taking a cautious sip. Trellix's mandibles twitched in amusement. "This is not a social drink. This is a symbol." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Of what?" Trellix looked out over the city once rigid, now alive with the movement of change. Of a new era. Marcus followed his gaze, watching as lights flickered across the Cevarin capital. The change was happening not in secret, not in fear, but openly. It was real. Permanent. Trellix turned back to him. "None of this would have been possible without you." Marcus smirked, leaning back. "I didn't do it alone." "No," Trellix admitted. "But you started it." Marcus exhaled. For the first time in weeks, he felt certainty. The fight was over. The Dominion had accepted the truth. Trellix's leadership was secured. The Cevarin had their future. And for the first time, Marcus knew his work here was done. Trellix raised his glass. To the future. Marcus clinked his glass against Trellix's. To a future that no longer needs me. Trellix studied him. You're leaving. Marcus nodded. My job was to make sure your people saw what was possible. Now they do. Trellix's mandibles twitched in amusement. You never stop. Marcus grinned. Doctor's curse. The two of them sat in silence, watching a world that no longer needed saving. No more battles, no more ultimatums. Only a world changed better for it. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus let himself relax. For good.